During the intense bombing campaigns over Vietnam, one of the most tragic figures was Lieutenant Everest, the first American pilot to be shot down in North Vietnam. At the time of his capture, he was only 26 years old and had been married for just 6 months. Sadly, not long after his imprisonment, he received distressing news that his young wife in Florida was seeking a divorce to find new happiness. In those early years, the US greatly underestimated the Vietnamese troops, especially since it was only in 1965 that the Soviet Union began providing substantial military support to Vietnam. However, to the Americans' surprise, just 3 months later, the Vietnamese forces had already shot down numerous American planes. This led to a significant number of aircraft losses for the US in 1965 and 1966. According to US records, by the end of 1965, there were 61 captured American pilots. By 1966, an average of 8 US aircraft were shot down every 10 days, resulting in an additional 86 American pilots being held at the infamous Hoa Lo prison. This period marked a significant escalation in the conflict, illustrating the effectiveness and resilience of the Vietnamese air defenses. During their time in Hoa Lo prison, the stories of American pilots often mix tragedy with bitter irony. One notable example is Richard "Pop" Kearn, who had a knack for getting captured in enemy territory. His first combat flight during World War II ended with him being shot down over Germany, leading to a 9-month imprisonment. Decades later, during the Vietnam War, shortly after he started flying missions, he was shot down again and spent another 15 months as a prisoner at Hoa Lo. However, even Kearn's misfortunes pale in comparison to those of Robinson Reisner, an American hero from the Korean War. Reisner completed 109 successful missions and amassed 3,000 combat flying hours, a record not easily matched. Despite his illustrious track record, his time in Vietnam was brief and dramatic. He was shot down on just his 5th mission, but Reisner's story took an extraordinary turn after his aircraft was hit. He managed to eject over the sea and was rescued by a US naval team. This twist of fate saved him from the harsh conditions of captivity that might have awaited him had he landed in enemy territory. His tale is a stark reminder of the unpredictability and harsh realities of aerial combat in wartime. Robinson Reisner, initially celebrated as a legendary figure and hero of the US Air Force, graced the front pages of major American newspapers like Time, which hailed him as a symbol of American valor and prowess. However, the tone shifted dramatically after Reisner was shot down over Thanh Hoa on September 16, 1965, and subsequently taken prisoner. His capture led to a lengthy 7.5 years at Hoa Lo prison. Following his capture, US media became noticeably silent about his ordeal, reflecting a broader reticence to discuss the fates of captured pilots during the Vietnam War. The large number of US pilots captured in Vietnam, many of whom came from influential families, placed significant pressure on the US during the Paris peace talks. The US government found itself compelled to explore every possible avenue to secure their release. While the efforts to gather intelligence on the locations of POWs have been well documented, the specifics of how the US selected and trained its forces for potential rescue operations are less widely known. These missions required not only precise intelligence, but also meticulously planned logistics and training to ensure the highest chances of success while minimizing the risk to the forces involved. During that period, the US military's selection process for soldiers participating in special operations, such as the planned raid, was extremely secretive and stringent. Volunteers were recruited without being informed about where they would go, what they would do, or the ultimate purpose of their mission. They were only aware that the operation would be exceedingly challenging. The preliminary list of volunteers underwent a rigorous screening process. Any soldier who had recently married or whose spouse was pregnant was immediately excluded from consideration. This was to ensure that all selected personnel were completely focused on the mission without any distractions from personal life. Only those who could commit 200% of their dedication to training were considered further. The final stage of the selection process involved interviews, which, paradoxically, served no real purpose in determining a candidate's suitability for the mission. Instead, it functioned as a method to mislead the soldiers about the true nature of their training and upcoming operation. Each candidate was asked seemingly unrelated questions like, "Do you know how to ski?" or "How long can you walk in the desert without water?" or even bizarre queries such as, "Does your skin burn easily in the sun? Can you tolerate being in a crowded room with Lebanese who eat raw garlic but are afraid of water and don't bathe?" After the interviews, the commanders knew that the soldiers would likely discuss among themselves trying to piece together the purpose of their training and the location of the upcoming raid based on the odd questions asked. With the operation codenamed Ivory Coast, many speculated that the raid might take place in the Middle East or Africa, never suspecting Vietnam. This level of secrecy was maintained so tightly that only top-level figures like President Nixon, National Security Advisor Kissinger, and a few key cabinet members were fully in the loop. Lower-level allies, such as South Vietnamese, President Nguyen Van Thieu, or any high-ranking officers under his command, were not privy to any details, even after the operation had concluded. The meticulous planning, selection, and training processes illustrate the lengths to which the U.S. military went to ensure operational security and prepare their personnel for the challenges they would face during the rescue mission. For the team of American pilots, flying undetected by radar required them to fly low, hugging the treetops and navigating through mountain valleys for hours on end. This was challenging enough for helicopter pilots, but for those flying larger aircraft like the C-130, which had the task of leading the formation, the challenge was multiplied. These aircraft needed to fly slowly and at low altitudes to allow the helicopters to keep pace. Achieving such slow flight required perfect coordination among all four engines. Any discrepancy in engine performance significantly increased the risk of a crash, and flying low and slow meant there was no time to deploy parachutes in an emergency. These conditions were already exceedingly difficult, but the pilots also had to add two more: flying at night under dim moonlight and without the use of radio communications. This meant they had to fly in silence and maintain tight formation. A minor error could lead to a collision with another aircraft or the mountainous terrain. For the ground troops, their training was equally stringent. Every position in the raid had to be executed with precision, down to the second and centimeter. A single misstep or timing error could result in friendly fire casualties. Each target, representing Vietnamese troops, had to be densely marked with bullet hits to meet the standards. After shooting, commanders would count the bullet marks on each target to determine if the standards were met. Any soldier who failed to meet these standards 3 times was reassigned to administrative or logistics duties. In addition to shooting drills, the American soldiers also trained in other skills such as lockpicking, breaking hinges, and cutting chains with acetylene torches. They practiced carrying each other out of the strike zone, simulating rescuing a captured official. If anyone was curious about who was carrying them, the answer would be that it was a captured official. The U.S. also meticulously prepared for worst-case scenarios, such as rescuing prisoners who might have lost their sanity or become irrational due to the prolonged captivity. Therefore, the soldiers had to practice carrying individuals who might thrash, scream, scratch, or resist to ensure they were prepared for any condition they might encounter during the mission. In addition to soldiers, the rescue team included a doctor tasked with caring for the health of the prisoners upon their extraction from the camp. The doctor's responsibilities involved preparing essential items such as clothing, rubber sandals, warm blankets, and crucially, specialized earplugs. These earplugs were especially important because the pilots, having been in a quiet environment for so long, could suffer permanent hearing damage from the loud noise of helicopter engines during the hours-long flight after their rescue. With all preparations complete, the next task for the U.S. was to choose the perfect moment for the attack. Meteorological experts advised that the raid should be timed for when the weather was clear and the moon provided sufficient light for visibility. In 1970, this window was identified from November 20th to November 25. Waiting until March of the following year was not a viable option due to increasing domestic protests in the U.S. and the need to strengthen the U.S. position at the Paris peace talks. Thus, the window from November 20th to 25 was the only feasible option. As for the specific timing of the raid, U.S. surveillance was highly detailed and meticulous. The local residents near the Son Tai prison camp were unaware of its actual function, believing it to be merely a military storage site, and had no knowledge of the activities within. Yet, the U.S. managed to monitor all Vietnamese activities closely, enabling them to plan the rescue operation with precision during this narrow window, ensuring minimal detection and maximum efficiency. American intelligence operatives in Syria, disguised as staff from the International Red Cross, were warmly received as they inspected the conditions of the prisoners. However, their true mission was to meticulously monitor even the smallest activities within Vietnam. They calculated the schedule of guard shifts at the watchtowers, determining the exact times when guards would change over. They noted these small details because the transition times between shifts represented moments of potential vulnerability. Outgoing guards were tired and less alert, while incoming ones might not yet be fully prepared. Specifically targeting these transition periods meant that the Vietnamese forces would be caught off guard during a raid. The timing of the raid had been set, and the US had also detailed plans for diversionary tactics to distract Vietnamese forces. They planned where to place explosives on bridges to obstruct routes and coordinated with the US Navy on a feint attack on Haiphong to further mislead Vietnamese forces about the real target at Son Tai. Every aspect of the operation was meticulously planned down to the second. The raid was scheduled for the night of November 20th, as a storm in the Philippines was expected to hit Vietnam, potentially providing additional cover. However, just hours before the operation was set to commence, at 16:30 on November 19th, American commanders received intelligence that all prisoners had been moved from the location. Whether the raid proceeded under these circumstances will be revealed in the next episode on the channel Legends of History. That concludes today's episode on historical discussions. Thank you for your interest and attention, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel Legends of History